I'm the managing director of AbleMaxx. We're a representation and consultancy for global industry suppliers. I've worked with Kathy for a while. She's the owner of All About Flights and a provider of flight logistics, destination viability and ticketing services to the corporate and event management industry. Kathy, it's been a tough year. We don't need to explain why. I know you're going to kick off by letting us know how you've dealt with the COVID challenge.
Yeah, it has been a difficult year. You don't need me to say this to any of you. You know, we're all in this situation together. We are a travel company like a lot of others out there. And I know that I have some industry colleagues on this chat now that do a similar job to us. But All About Flights, this is all we do. Groups is all we do. Whereas some travel agencies out there are traditionally a business travel agent that may well lend themselves to MICE or groups, or they could have been a leisure company initially, but this for us is everything. So as and when the world started to close and become smaller in terms of where you could travel to, it obviously affected us hugely, as it did all of you. I'm old enough, sadly, to remember the first Gulf War. I was working for British Airways when that first happened, and very naive and very selfish of me at the time. I was just delighted that my staff travel was going to work for once and I could get on any available flight that I wanted to. Very naive and oblivious to the economic problems it would cause the airline only a few months later. I remember the second Gulf War, you know, September 11, and then the ash cloud 10 years ago. I know that many of you will remember all of these things, but this has been different because of just how long it's been going on for. So I know I don't need to remind you all that lockdown here in the UK was March. We were massively affected from early February. Pure chance that we had a lot of groups going out to Asia, some for Japan, some from China, and all of a sudden people are ringing us every 2 minutes of the day, not wanting to travel. Airlines didn't have policy. We felt very, very useless, like we couldn't help them. Airlines, in my opinion, and for those industry colleagues that are on this call, you can share your views as well if you feel the same, but I did feel that while many of you were ringing us or people like us, you'd be amazed that we didn't have the tools to be able to help you initially. We were fighting the airlines all the time for policy, something that we sit here now and think should have been available instantly. Certainly by the time the UK was in national lockdown, if not 3 or 4 weeks before that, but many of the airlines were slow to react. So from our point of view, when this first started, the frustration was the sheer number of inquiries we were getting to move groups and the lack of policy to be able to do that. We had to internally just decide to go in a very, I guess, sensible manner, really, a date of travel manner. In February, we dealt with February. In March, we would try and deal with anything that was thrown at us. And for any of you that are on this call that work with us, I hope you never had a situation where you couldn't get through. Never the emails were not answered or the phone wasn't answered. We had to try and do the do and keep answering all the calls. And we just suddenly started to work in the date of travel order and tackle it in what we felt was quite a sensible way. Every single group for the latter part of March, April, May, June, the whole lot moved. We worked really hard to try and just secure a situation for our clients where they were not financially out of pocket. We wanted a situation where every group was transferred where possible, if policy permitted. And we were lucky. With the exception of 3 groups, literally every single thing we had was, we got a suitable solution to it, if you like. And we started moving things and we had a variety of what people wanted to do. Some people were moving to Q3 and Q4 of this year, and some were straight away going for Q1 or Q2 next year. So we had a real mix. What then happened by July time is we realized that everything that had moved for September and October and November was now being moved again. And is currently sitting, to give you an overview, we have 1 group in January, 1 in February, 3 in March, and we have about 45 groups between April, May and June. I don't know how the rest of you fare and what your future group bookings look like, but if things travel as booked, April, May and June for us is a great quarter, it's a great period, but we all know that the reality of this situation is these clients are going to be expected to pay balances in January and February for travel in March and April, for example. So I'm very aware that whilst we have a great April, May and June at the moment, we don't know that that's going to stay, whether it will stay as booked. Some people have already moved their April, May and June bookings to later in the year. Some have retained a credit for the future. So we've seen a real mix of what clients want to do. I've recently kind of sat back and thought, are we all ignoring Q2? Is everybody just assuming that our sector might start to return to some form of normality by September, October, November? And I think the answer a few weeks ago to that was yes, and we were perhaps a little bit guilty of not thinking about Q2. So we've gone out there and tackled the airlines and challenged the airlines to give us a policy, for example, that would enable any of you to book a group for April and May, and if you wanted to cancel it by the end of February or March, then your funds would be protected and you can do.
Take a step back a bit and just ask specifically how you feel the airlines, and I'm sure there's a lot of disparity between them, have dealt with the last 6 months with their passengers on the group side, and how you think that could change, or will it become better or worse moving forwards when corporate group travel picks up again?
On the whole, with hindsight and speaking to you now, the vast majority of scheduled airlines are doing what we would expect them to do now. But back in February when we needed them, they were appalling, utterly appalling without exception. I thought their policy was too delayed. It didn't come in quick enough. To understand, I suppose, that from an airline's perspective, they don't particularly want to be refunding all the time, because then it's going to pose the next section that has probably plagued many of you, and that is about refunds and how they process them. That's equally been slow, if at all. So I think initially they were unsure what to do, and if the right people making the right decisions weren't available at the time, the policies were slow to come. As I say, one of the worst was one of our national carriers, but then they put it right. Whilst they were slow initially, they were then very good and very ahead of the game with the following months. You know, we may have got policy for March, April, May, but then they were very quick to throw in June, and then July and August, and then very quick for September, October, and now very quick for Q1 and some of Q2 next year. So different again if you're talking about low cost. You know, one of the best airlines we dealt with initially, I don't know whether any of you had cause to work with Jet2, but they were initially brilliant. They were a breath of fresh air. They've changed in the last few months in that they've become more strict and more problematic, but initially they were very good. You know, we really have seen a mixture of how the airlines have reacted.
Do you have a feeling of when group travel is going to pick up again?
Right now, as someone that's fundamentally responsible for all about flights, I'm assuming we don't get anywhere near like what it was until September, October next year. That's my assumption, because I think if I work on that and the spring is any better, then that's a bonus. The vaccine news recently is it's incredibly good news. Just the announcement that they had it was great, first of all, but then on Monday with the announcement of it being approved, we've had 3 or 4 brand new inquiries, brand new. So we're not talking about moving existing or rebooking of existing that have suddenly fallen into range. 3 or 4 new inquiries since Monday morning, and that's really refreshing. And I wanted to share that with all of you, that, you know, the inquiries have now started to come in, and that's possibly as a result of the vaccine, possibly as a result of people feeling a bit more comfortable and confident. I would like to say to all of you, don't disregard April, May, June. We never really have groups for July and August, to be honest. As a business, corporate incentives don't tend to travel in July and August. So that's always been a quiet time for us. Dec20 rather inarticulately, Maxine. I think September, October is when we'll really see the vast majority of the groups we've currently got booked being able to travel and being expected to travel. That's what we want to see. But I am hopeful of the confidence to continue with what people have got booked for April, May and June, should we get through to January or February without any more hiccups. But we have spoken to quite a few hotel groups recently and several airlines that are on board. If you were, for example, to engage with a customer in the new year to talk about April, May, knowing all of your funds were protected, could that enable an internal sign-off or an internal agreement to be given, knowing the funds were protected? So the airline would protect the money and transfer it. I better just say here, given that this is being recorded, I am talking about scheduled airlines. You know, there's a handful that we've spoken to and got agreement with to work with particularly. I'm not talking about low-cost carriers that may not do it. But if, for example, this is totally hypothetical, I don't know, mid-May, you've got a group, 40 seats to Rome on British Airways, and in February or March, you decide you don't want to go, your money is protected and either A, transferred to another destination on their network, if that's what you want over that time, or transferred to another point in the future.
To be ready
Yeah.
in time to manage a surge of business.
I think, to answer you honestly, if you are talking about a surge for Q3 and Q4, the answer is yes, the airlines will be ready. If there's suddenly a surge for February, the answer would be no. So in answer to the question, I think if there was a sudden surge for January, February, March, they would struggle. If there was a sudden surge for April, May, June, with just a few weeks' notice, they would struggle. But if in January, the inquiries are coming in for April, May and June, that may well prevent them from taking the action of removing schedules from services or reducing frequencies. Right now, I can tell you, to many of the airlines I've spoken to today on another project, they are all saying to me, low cost and scheduled, they are assuming July is business as normal. I think it'll be a steady, slow trickle of individuals willing to travel and families booking holidays in the new year that may well start that confidence to return and come back.
And what's your feeling as well, Kathy, on the airports being ready? I mean, are people going to have proof of a vaccine? Is testing ready? Is there capacity for testing for a surge in travel?
That's a tricky one to answer, because no two airports work in the same way and no two destinations operate in the same way. But just to clarify, the airlines, in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, everybody, please don't quote me, but the airlines won't actually need to take any responsibility for whether somebody's vaccinated or not. Any of us on this phone call now could step on a plane tomorrow if we choose to, without a vaccine. The only prerequisite for the airline at the moment is that you must wear a face mask. So you can travel without the vaccine. It won't be the airlines that dictate. What it will be is the country that you're traveling to. So for example, if you're flying on Emirates tomorrow to Dubai, you need to be in possession of a negative COVID test. And you're able to travel, still wear the mask. What will happen many months down the line is you won't need the proof of a negative COVID test. It would be replaced with the equivalent of your vaccination. Now, when you think about the vaccine being rolled out, and I know that many of you will be wondering how they do it, and I too am wondering how they do it. It'd be interesting to hear from my industry colleagues on here that have been in aviation for the time that I have. I actually don't think it would be that problematic to do. I was saying internally to the team yesterday, I went to the Gambia maybe 20, 25 years ago. I wasn't allowed to board the flight at Manchester Airport until I produced my yellow fever certificate. So health requirements and inoculations exist today anyway. Even outside of COVID, there are certain requirements that you need to have when you're traveling into a given destination. So I just think it would be quite simplistic in that an airline will either just allow you to travel with a mask and not worry about a vaccine or a COVID test, or there'll be a stipulation dependent on the country you're going to that means you produce the negative COVID test taken within 3 days, or you have your vaccination certificate.
It's just sent a link with Qantas obviously requesting travellers to prove they've had their inoculation once the vaccine's available and being distributed.
Yeah, Qantas is slightly different, and the reason for that is because of the destination. So Australia is a very, very good example of how this has been managed well within the country. At the moment, Australia has a situation where they're only allowing a certain number of passengers to disembark an aircraft at any one time. So they've put a cap on it. For argument's sake, let's say a Qatar Airways aircraft lands in Sydney and it can only have 30 people on board, for example. Now, all 30 of those will have to be with the negative test, have to be a national returning home, and or potentially be vaccinated. So it'd be interesting to see. You know,
Steve says there could be a capacity issue potentially.
Well, now that brings me nicely on to my next point. Yes, could there be a capacity issue? Yeah, in some cases. What I'm slightly worried about today is all of our 2020 groups. It's fact that they have already become 2021. All of them have already moved without exception. So when you would come to us, for argument's sake, for 40 people, Birmingham to Ibiza on a certain flight, if you had 9 months lead time, you'd probably be within a reasonable shout of getting the seats at a good price and everything's lovely. But at the moment, what you might find is those flights are already quite busy because of all the transferred passengers. Some airlines haven't allowed refunds, so everything has been transferred. So the demand is there already, I guess, and the capacity could be problematic if the flights are already busy. Capacity could also be problematic if airlines terminate routes, or if somebody once did 5 flights a day on a certain route and they're only going to do 3 going forward, or the worst of them all, the financial collapse of one of the airlines that served the route, that puts pressure on everybody else that's there. So yes, it could become a problem, and I think each destination, I'll have a view on each destination depending on which airlines serve the route and what aircraft type they're doing. What we're also finding at the moment is many airlines are changing the aircraft types that they're using. The A380s were deemed an aircraft that wasn't viable in any case, and many of them were going to take them out of service in the next 5 to 10 years anyway. They're absolutely fantastic when they're full, but unless they are operating at full capacity all the time, it wasn't the most economical aircraft to have on a route. So yes, in that situation, capacity may well become problematic because of those reasons explained. If one airline has disappeared financially, it puts pressure on the others in that they could become busy, or the rates could be, I'm going to use the term inflated, although I'd like to think the scheduled airlines don't do that. But of course, they take advantage of certain things that go on in the world at certain times of the year. And I think where you see aircraft changes like we've just highlighted, you take an A380 off a route and replace it with something smaller, and that will affect the capacity. Whatever stage of the process you're at, if you have a group booked to a country that is no longer viable, we would absolutely want them to help. Yes, we have some horror stories early on where they didn't, but the vast majority of airlines now are taking a much more sensible approach to how they would look at it.
Go back to some of the questions which may take us back to what you were saying before, Kathy, but I just want to make sure we're covered. Linda's saying they've had groups that cancelled in March with BA. They'll only honour the voucher scheme for those early bookings until March 2021. Have you any experience where they've extended any of your bookings until April 2022?
We haven't, because we were in a fortunate position with our groups in that we were able to just transfer to whenever. And originally British Airways had asked us to rebook everything by the 30th of December this year for the following year. With the change in circumstance in the UK and with the way that things have happened here, we've gone back. So that's just not viable at the moment because people are not comfortable to do that yet historically. So we have an agreement with them that if you're in a situation whereby we have a credit for the future, it is exactly that, a credit for the future. And we've now worked with them to remove the timeline from it. And I'll tell you what we are seeing, and not just us here, but equally when I speak to some of the long haul carriers that operate the route, the Maldives and the Seychelles have been particularly good routes for them at the moment. The forward bookings on those routes are fantastic. We're working with a client at the moment. He's got a group of 46. Well, they've found a solution in the Maldives where they have their own private island. It is a COVID-friendly island, if you like, because on that day when that group arrive, there's only them. There's only them going to be on that island because the number of properties available on the particular island they want fits with the group size. So the Maldives is doing really, really well. We've got new requests in Q2, would you believe, for Kathmandu, for Sri Lanka, and for the Maldives. South Africa's had a major boost at the moment. That's reopened. BA have relaunched their Joburg and Cape Town service. They haven't put Durban back on as yet, but that seems to be doing really well. Yeah, it's interesting to see which routes are doing, but it is disproportionate long haul at the moment.
Maybe we're going to have the surge of Europe in the new year.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. Do you know what? You all might think I'm just ridiculously optimistic, but I do sit here and hope that we might just see a flip side to the norm for a while, in that we may well get inquiries in February time for the spring that just have an unusually short lead time. I was asked yesterday by a major carrier to tell them what my best guess is in terms of what percentage of revenue do I think we can generate in 2021 for a particular carrier based on 2019. Well, you know, who knows? However, it was interesting to know that the carrier's mentality, once I'd spoken to them in detail about it, was actually, you know what, even if we're at 25% of what we would have been, that's actually a better assumption than what our industry as a collective are assuming. We had notifications from IATA, one of our governing bodies, and also the Civil Aviation Authority back in May, that suggested the travel industry sector generically wouldn't return to pre-COVID levels for 5 to 6 years. That horrified me at the time. But actually, you can almost see why, because of course, they're looking at a bigger picture. They're looking at cruise companies. They're looking at ferry crossings. They're looking at everything. I'm only looking at the sector that we're all engaged in. So it's interesting to know that they're assuming that if we can achieve 25% in 2021 of what 2019 would have been, that we're doing all right, and that it might be a slow recovery. We might be up to 50 to 75% by 2022. If everything that we have, as I said to you now, if everything that we have booked and confirmed in 2021 travels as planned, or even if it gets moved but stays in 2021, we will be about 60% of what 2019 was.
Your question's brilliant, and she's asking for a friend, but I think we're all friends here with this question. But will the airlines review loyalty programs, given most people haven't travelled for most of 2020?
Talking about the world's favourite airline, what I expect from them, and I don't know that this is tier related, so forgive me, dependent on the tier that you're at. I would like to think that BA treats everybody the same. Whether you're bronze, silver, gold, blue, I'd like to think the same rules apply. But just let me know and I can send you the right number and have a chat with them. I do know that personally, I was told that they would extend my current status for a year. It's not your personal fault that you've not been able to use them. Just make the call and see what you can do. Someone was telling me the other day that they traded their Avios for Laithwaite's wine. Genius. You know, I would like to just put one thought in people's minds. What COVID has taught me in this pandemic, times have changed. The airlines used to dictate to us what we could do, when we could do it, how we could do it. My attitude's a bit different at the moment. Back in October, I was sitting here thinking, why am I accepting that there is no policy for 2021? Why am I accepting that our future bookings are not as healthy as they should be? We've been lobbying all the airlines to say, if you want to improve your financial situation, if you want to have these future bookings that give you the confidence you need to keep these routes going in the future, then you need to give us the tools to be able to do that. I wanted to get a situation where you book a group in 2021 and you know that you're financially protected. I know we alluded earlier that it isn't just about the money for the flight, but we were talking specifically about Q1 and Q2 there. Part of me is frustrated that I'm having to ask for this and push for this and demand it to a certain extent. But what I will say, some news hot off the press last night or the night before, because we've been on at this for weeks. You'll see in the press very soon, if you haven't already, the groups created in January, Virgin Atlantic are going to, I guess, authorise a free change of date if you need to. You know, you could change your group once or twice if you need to do it. And that gives you the confidence. You know, you look at that list and we've all talked about the Caribbean and how well that's doing. Put it out there, you know. Virgin Atlantic, I'm going to read a snippet for you all. If I book a group today, this policy doesn't stand. For bookings made from the 1st of January, where the original travel date was on or before the 31st of December 2021, they will then waive the change fees for you to be able to change that group twice if you need to do it. Now, hear that, all of you. That isn't just BA, that isn't just Virgin. We've been doing this with everybody. We've been tackling every airline. That's why I'm saying let's rewrite the rule book. If any of you have an inquiry out there, if any of you want to work with an airline on a particular route at a particular point of the year, if the policy isn't there yet, let us go and fight for it. When it's on a route where there's airline choice, we've got a very strong case to suggest to one airline that the other one will do it if they don't. If you do it on a route where they've got a monopoly, it's a little bit trickier. We have very good flexibility with BA at the moment up to the end of May. Why they won't give us June, July, August, September, I do not know. So there have been some things through this pandemic that have been totally nonsensical, just don't make sense at all. And one of my big frustrations that I'm going to share with you was actually the refund process. You know, even getting the airline to agree that a refund was going to be okay, the amount of time it took to get it. If any of you personally are waiting for refunds, do push. You are legally entitled to them, especially if your flight was cancelled, you are entitled to them. The flip side, if you forced a refund back in March and it was an airline that was precarious, Lufthansa wrote to us and actually wrote down they had 25 days cash to operate. If they were forced to issue every single refund on the day that they were requested, they'd have been going to the government for a bailout. Probably did anyway, eventually. But there is a flip side to it in that if I was ever going to be fair to the airlines and try and be neutral, if you are able to tolerate the credit for the future because you know you will use it, that could save an airline, which means it can save the routes and the availability of seats for you as and when you need it. If airlines start collapsing between now and March, it will affect capacity, which is one of the questions we looked at earlier.
Absolutely. I think that was a big message for the whole hospitality industry at the beginning of March. Kathy, thank you very much.